Hey, welcome to the Matrix Remix. My name is James Hill. I'm an occupational therapist and I've been using ACT as a guiding model for my clinical practice for more than 20 years. You may have watched another video where I walked you through a classic version of the ACT matrix. In this video, I've rearranged the format a bit. As we go along, I'm going to suggest some alternate terms that I have found useful in my understanding. I'll also add some descriptions and metaphors that can use the matrix to develop things like acceptance and defusion. I want to start by crediting Kevin Polk, Jared Hambright, and Mark Webster, who created the matrix. I also want to thank Benjamin Schoendorf, who introduced me to the matrix at the ACBS World Conference in 2014. So the matrix starts with this pretty basic idea that we can do things that would move us toward the life that we want to live, and we can also do things that would move us away from that life. Part of what influences that is things that happen inside of us, like thoughts and feelings, and part of what influences that is things that happen outside of us in the world, or our actions. If you're familiar with the classic ACT matrix, you'll notice that I have turned it upside down and backwards. You'll find that people use different terms and different arrangements that make sense to them. You should use the one that makes the most sense to you. I like this arrangement because when I work with people, I start in the upper left-hand quadrant and I continue around the matrix in a clockwise direction. This feels more organized in my brain for some reason. I've met other people who disagree. We start the matrix by identifying values. This is a list of examples of things that people would consider part of their best life, the kinds of things that would bring them the most vitality. Depending on the person, I'll encourage different levels of specificity. For example, a client and I might identify broad categories of relationships that are important to them, things like friends, family, spouse, parenting. We might also try to identify more specific qualities, like what kind of spouse would the person most want to be. It's possible to approach the matrix by identifying something about all categories listed. Alternatively, you can focus on one specific area, like work or how a person would like to spend their free time. When it comes to personal qualities, I have found it helpful to ask people to identify a few words that they would like to imagine others using to describe them. So for example, would they like to be thought of as kind, reliable, patient, and so on. Next, we identify thoughts, feelings, and body sensations that tend to evoke behaviors that move people away from their values. Hooks is a helpful general term for this category, which I think was coined by Russ Harris. This is a simple metaphor that sets the stage for helpful conversations. For example, it can be helpful to explore with people how they know when they're on the hook, or ways that they can unhook themselves, or situations when they're more likely to take the bait. Next, we move to identify examples of behaviors that move people away from their values. The general term I like for this is away moves. After the client is familiar with this language, we might explore things like, when you ended the evening early and went to bed, was that a towards move or an away move? Finally, we spend some time identifying examples of behaviors that work to move the person toward their values. At this point in the process, I often like to pause and suggest that it's very common when people are stuck in the right side of the matrix for two things to develop. The first is people begin to relate to their hooks like they're a threat. The second is that people often get self-critical or feel shame about their away moves. This is not always the case, so I like to confirm with my client that they've experienced this before moving forward. If it has been their experience, I like to point out that away moves that they listed are just the human version of what all animals do if they feel threatened. In fact, we can think of toward and away moves differently. Toward moves are usually in the service of living more fully, and away moves are usually in the service of feeling safe and secure. This is an important point, because people are usually vulnerable to thinking about toward moves as good and away moves as bad. The truth is, safety and living fully are both important and can be complementary. However, a common problem for most people is this tendency to prioritize feelings of security to such an extent that they significantly compromise the quality of their life. Another common vulnerability is a tendency to try to manage thoughts and feelings related to vulnerability in ways that neither result in safety nor living fully. If you need examples of this, you might think about substance misuse or disordered eating, both processes that can help people feel better or more in control, and at the same time destroy their health and quality of life. So, we could think of this process in this way. People begin to treat their thoughts and feelings as threats, like a bear. And they do things that all animals do to try to avoid threats. They avoid things that might increase these thoughts and feelings. They do things to try to run away or hide out from their thoughts and feelings. They might struggle with their thoughts and feelings or try to outsmart them in some way. Many times they simply freeze, they shut down, or they check out. People often consider suicide not because they want to die, but out of desperation to escape their thoughts and feelings. While involved in this process, people often lose touch with their values, and the toward moves either decrease or stop entirely. All of this would make sense if you're dealing with a bear. Living fully can wait. Security is the only thing that matters. Here is a common approach that people suggest or try that is usually not helpful. Let's try an experiment. I want you to spend 20 seconds trying not to think of a bear. Don't think of the word or the image. Don't have any related memories. Just get rid of it. Please notice what you do to try to accomplish this, and notice what happens. Ready? Start. Okay, how did it go? Chances are you either had a lot of bear-related thoughts, or you were very active in distracting yourself. You looked away from the screen, you repeated a different thought in your head. The problem with distraction and control efforts is both that they often fail, or make the thoughts more pronounced, and they require so much energy and attention that there's little left to actually apply to your life or to living fully. Here's a less common but maybe more effective approach. When you saw this bear on the screen, you did not run from the room terrified. Why not? Because it's not a bear, it's a picture, right? It's a symbol that represents a bear, which is not the same thing at all. Well, I would argue that your thoughts and feelings are all symbols that represent things. They're not the same as the things that they represent. Feeling inadequate and being inadequate are not the same thing. Thinking that life is hopeless is not the same thing as life being hopeless. Sometimes our thoughts and feelings are helpful, and sometimes they're not. What is helpful is relating to our thoughts and feelings as thoughts and feelings, and not the things that they represent. I want you to imagine one day you're listening to a favorite podcast. In the past, this podcast has featured people who've given you helpful advice to live your life. But today, the guest starts talking about awful, offensive, and frightening things. They give terrible advice. So you turn it off, but you just can't get it out of your head. You can't unhear what you've already heard, and it just keeps repeating itself in your mind over the next 3 days. Now, that would be an unpleasant experience. However, would you need to believe the things that the guest was saying? Would you need to follow their advice? When thoughts come from outside of our head, we usually have a different relationship to them. We don't blame ourselves for having them. Like them or not, we don't really feel like we must adopt them or do what they say. They're just ideas, and we're free to choose how they influence or to what degree they influence what we do. So one way to think about that is that we can either have thoughts, and what I mean by that is we can experience them like a temporary mental event, like a terrible podcast in our head. Or alternatively, we can buy into our thoughts, and in this case, we experience them as if they're true and like we must do what they suggest we do. It's sometimes unclear what to do with a thought or a feeling. We can often get stuck feeling like we have to buy into this thought because it's true. A more constructive question than "is my thought true?" is, if I buy into this thought, will it move me toward my values? I would argue that the answer to this question is more important than if it's true or not. If you found this video helpful, you're going to find more resources like this on our website. Please give us a thumbs up to help others discover this video, subscribe to our channel to find all of our videos, and click the bell if you want to notice when we release more. Thank you so much for your precious time and attention today.